Yes, okay. Welcome to Enrichment Triad Model. What are type 1, 2, and 3? So these are going to be little bite-sized, like 5-10 minute crash courses and components of the school-wide enrichment model. I hope you'll find them useful, and I hope that they will springboard great conversation for us. So type 1, 2, and 3 activities are the components of the enrichment triad model. Type 1, general exploratory activities. That's a field trip, that's a guest speaker, that's reading a really high quality picture book. That's a very basic demonstration or experiment in something the kids are maybe not previously familiar with. Type 2 is your methodological training, your how-to activities. That's when the kids are, in many cases, intrinsically motivated to learn specific skills that will help them move forward with whatever it is that they're excited about. And type 3 are independent or small group investigations, products, and or performances, ideally for an authentic audience. And the key there is that it has to be very much child-led. The kids are excited. They've been intrinsically motivated to continue working. They have their own task commitment trajectory. And they have really owned whatever it is that they're working on, and they're producing something that is outside of whatever you may have assigned. I hear some kind of informal discussion at the type 2.5, which is very inquiry based, very project based, but still very much structured by the teacher and the curriculum. And there's a time and a place for that, and that's amazing. It's hard to get to the true type 2, so we'll talk about that later on when we talk a little bit about the authentic problem, another one of these little tasks. So you can see that the arrows point in both directions between all of the different components. Calling them type 1, 2, and 3 makes it sound hierarchical, linear. You go from 1 to 2 to 3, but it doesn't really work that way because we are talking about solving authentic problems. So your type 1, maybe you take a field trip to the zoo and a kid takes a real interest in a specific type of animal. And that turns into wanting to do some sort of project related to that. Well, then their type 2 skills are going to need to learn research skills, how to find and evaluate sources, how to turn that information into their own words. Maybe they want to think about designing a whole new habitat. Well, then those are measurement skills. They might need communication skills to reach out to someone at the zoo. And there are other examples, and my mini course examples here as I wrote through this presentation. And then taking that to a type 3, maybe they notice something that they think is a problem to be solved in that animal's habitat, and they want to advocate for that animal at the zoo. Then that's something that's above and beyond, or selling a product that will help benefit that animal somehow. They found they're endangered, and I want to create this, and then I'm going to sell this, and I'm going to give the money to these kinds of things that kids think of that are above and beyond and outside of the regular curriculum. And these are kind of rare and they're really special, but we want to find ways to nurture and encourage that for all of our kids in school. So my first example here that I think gives a nice flow of the different types of activities. A lot of you probably remember, those of you watching this that are DTS folks, on the bird murder, which was a really awesome, serendipitous, authentic thing that happened. So here we've got two things and the two images here. One is another Renzulli image that's sort of a ripple, right? Problem finding and focusing, rippling out to finding appropriate outlets for students' work. That's the authentic audience, right? um, and everything in between. I suggest when I have these really complex Renzulli diagrams that you just pause for a second and take them in, and we can discuss them when we have our in-person discussions because they're meaty and they're complex. And if I were to read through all of them and explain them, these videos would be like 3 hours long. And then on the right there's my bird skull and some kind of bedraggled bird feathers. It was a great type 1. It was a great accidental type 1. There was just this bird skull and this pile of feathers that students stumbled across on their way to go work in the greenhouse. And it sparked their interest, it sparked my interest, and it was a nice intersection with the everyday regular classroom science curriculum that fourth grade had been working on at that time, animal adaptations, food chains. And it was a perfect serendipitous moment, right? So we ended up investigating it like a crime scene, and that segs really nicely into a type 2, where we had to explain, well, I had to explain how to take crime scene notes. So we had to dug into that. What kind of information do you think we need to gather? How do we gather that information without disturbing the crime scene? How do we know what's a clue and what's not? How do we know what might be reasonable suspects or what the victim is? So we had to do a lot of work with measurement, with close observation with research skills and evaluating sources. Delved into some map reading and figuring out the ranges of different types of predatory animals, and on and on and on and on. And those were cyclical. Each time we thought we had a new theory, we had to dig into ways to back that up and evaluate that, to make sure that what we were doing was reasonable. We dissected owl pellets. That was a whole process, which led to reevaluating our suspects as well. Um, so that sort of cycle of new information and then having the type two to investigate the new information, and that cycled and cycled and cycled. And for some kids, that immediately began to seg into a type three. For some kids, it didn't. For some kids, they were still kind of scaffolded along by the classroom. But the way that that led from watching the kids that really took off with it, um, was towards kind of putting the suspects on trial, and they could choose to prosecute or defend a suspect depending on what they felt was accurate and relevant. And their authentic audience in this case was their peers. They really wanted to convince their peers. Now, for every child in the class was this a type three? No. I mean, some kids were just kind of doing what the class was doing, and did a very good job of it and learned a lot from it. But you could really tell the difference between the kids that owned it and absolutely wanted to advocate for or against a suspect and felt strongly about it, and those who felt like they're just completing an assignment. And that's going to happen sometimes. We have a whole class, when I'm not pulling out just a very small group of kids that want to continue to work on something. I think of the kids who really took the news show and ran with it. That was a type three for them. And not everybody was doing that. Not everybody could do that. And I've not had the same level of success of getting kids to grasp exactly that and move forward with it, because it is a type three. It was a true type three. They were really running their own news show. So as we dug into this, there were some more, there's some tie-ins with the mini course. You may remember the urban wildlife mini course, setting up the wildlife camera, and that was a terrific intersection with the bird murder as well, because we could dig into how to set up a wildlife camera, how we know what do we need to watch for, what do we need to have in that area, what are the resources that the animals need, what's the space. You see they're measuring here for parent volunteer to make sure that they have the correct spacing between the next large plant or other obstruction and where we put our wildlife camera. And ultimately what we found was there was this feral cat visiting our campus very, very early in the morning or very late at night, depending on your perspective, 4:20 in the morning here. And a lot of kids decided, this is it. This is our suspect. This cat's been eating the birds. That may or may not have been the case. That's the cool thing with a true problem, which is something that I'll talk about more. But I think it's pretty self-explanatory. If it's a real life problem, there often isn't a clear answer. No one has a clear answer, and that makes these kinds of experiences really fun. I've been asked when I presented about this elsewhere, like, do you ever contrive a problem? Um, Sometimes, and you guys have probably seen me do that sometimes, but nothing really stands up to these things that just kind of pop up in the world. They're so exciting. Um, so I've got this image in here again to kind of recap type one, two, and three. Type one here was finding the bird remains. Type two was every aspect of investigating that, and every aspect of that that looked like real field research, that looked like real police work, to the degree that was relevant, of course. Um, and the components that were research skills that we might think of as elementary, middle school, high school, like school research skills, because for these kids that's new. Not new. I mean, I know they did it in the regular classroom, but you know what I mean, right? Like being able to investigate sources, find their own sources, and evaluate whether they're good or not. These are things that all elementary school students kind of need over and over and over again, so that they can apply them throughout projects, throughout school. I know that you all know you do these things in class, and lots of kids need those reminders again and again. And then type two is the kids who really took it on and owned it. I had kids calling family members who were biologists and asking them questions, interviewing them over the phone. We found this bird skull and these feathers, and what do you think ate them? It became a type three for many kids because they took it on and owned that learning for themselves, and they were really psyched about it. Again, it was not for everyone. Everyone did some work with this and learned a lot from this, but some kids were taking it above and beyond and really owned that process of figuring out who our suspect was. Um, I think this is cool. Can I move this image of myself? I can. So relating the enrichment triad model to various organizational structures. I'm going to cover up that title. We don't really need the title, right? But that is relating the enrichment triad model to various organizational structures. And so this is thinking about what that can look like in different components of our program. So you have that same puzzle piece image here. The arrows look a little bit different, but they're showing the same kind of flow throughout, right? Type 1, type 2, and type 3. And you can see there, just like in the bird murder example, all students are going to get type 1s and all students are going to get type 2s. Candidates for follow up, the kids who are really excited about it, get the type 3. Um, and that is cyclical. It's cyclical because um, even once you're working in that type 3, you're still going to be dipping back into type 2 to learn more. And the other cool thing is whenever you have someone presenting their type 3, to an audience, that audience is then getting a type 1, right? Think about when I've done the fairs with the product mini course, the kids who are really excited about building marble runs and investigating physics chose to participate in the roller coaster physics. And they made these great model roller coasters and marble runs. They then demonstrated those to others, and that was a type 1. And from that point forward, I saw a lot of more really cool engineering of that type in Makerspace Week, even from younger kids. Second graders are really pumped about that because they saw these great structures of the cool physics, and they wanted to replicate that. They were introduced to it by somebody else presenting their type 3, which is a really cool cycle when you really get into this and you have kids sharing something that they've created that they're excited and passionate about, right? And then you can see these kind of flowing out different examples of how that might look in different instances. I can only give examples of what I've done. What I've done works for me and for the time that I have with kids, and what is going to work for you is going to look different. So we have regular classroom infusion, extension of an individual lesson or a unit that you're planning. So thinking of ways to infuse this into whatever your curriculum is. We are to some degree beholden to regular curriculum. On the rare occasions that you give that pre-assessment and a huge chunk of your class has compacted out, then you're ready to launch a lot of this. But in some cases, it's going to be little bits and pieces and parts that you can infuse in your regular curriculum, and you can do that. Special classes, resource room, pull out, enrichment clusters, AITD are when I had is not something in talent development. I'm going to get back to you on that because it's not a term that I use frequently, but it is one that pops up in the STEM literature, and then independent study. So resource room, pull out, enrichment clusters, independent study, special classes. A lot of that is that's me, right? You telling me, hey, my kids, they got a little bit of this in my regular curriculum, and I'd love to see them work on that in enrichment. Or, you know what, if you ran a mini course on this, I think a lot of kids would be pumped about it. Um, that's a lot that I can offer. Also, enrichment clusters, bam, discovery. If you're seeing that kids really want to take off of something, offering that as a discovery choice could be a really amazing way to get lots of kids digging into type 3s and taking that on and owning it. Extra and co-curricular activities and other special events in your school. Some of these might be good candidates for activities for Eco Club, for example, or for starting a new extracurricular, or for just something outside the regular curriculum. I think about the service project that Jan Morris's class did last year. The kids had pen pals in Haiti. They really cared a lot about their friends that they had made, and they wanted to offer relief for their school and for their community. And so they raised money and they did that. That's a type 3. That's a small group type 3. These kids took that on. They cared about it meaningfully and personally. They had real connections and they did what they needed to do. Type 2, understanding, what does this cost? What if we get this donated? How much should we pay? How much do we what can we buy with that? What do these people need? What can we send? There's a lot of research and investigation that went into that, and then a lot of work just doing. But that came from their hearts, and so that's a really great example. Those kinds of service learning projects are fantastic, fantastic type 3s because kids have this inherent sense of justice and of empathy and of wanting to do good in the world, and that's something that we should really grasp and run with it for those type 3s. Footnote, AITD is Academies of Inquiry and Talent Development. It's basically the high school version of enrichment clusters or discovery. Hey, thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed it and were able to overlook technical difficulties and that this will be an amazing springboard for amazing, rich conversations soon.